The Labor Department, in collaboration with the Statistical Office, is conducting a job openings and labor turnover survey. This survey will provide indicators on the labor demand side of the labor market. This survey will provide beneficial information for the educational sector, the business community, employers, and the state. The Chamber of Industry and Commerce fully endorsed this survey and is appealing to the business community to participate in this very important exercise.
Let's see what we find. For more information, check the Labor Department website at www.dol.gov.vc or contact 457-1789. That's 457-1789.
Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Roundtable Talk. This evening we are going to be having a fiery conversation, more or less. With me in the studio to do just that, to my right, we have the Customer Services Manager and former Head of Metering at Vinlec, Stanley Harris. We also have the Head of the Electrical Inspectorate Division, Hetty Francis. And we have the Fire Chief himself, Superintendent of Police, Joel James. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Thank you.
So good to have you all. Of course, within recent times, we've been having quite a bit of fires in around St. Vincent. Mostly house fires, but what I want to do is to ask the chief to start by giving us a synopsis basically of what has been happening in terms of recent fires in the country.
Good evening, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Good evening to the diaspora. As it relates to fires in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for 2022, we have had thus far 82 fires. We have had 25 house fires to date, 25 house fires, and we would have had 6 building fires. When I say building fires, I'm referring to
commercial
properties and huts, storerooms, and so forth. So we have them in a different category. We have had 35 bushfires, and that is because we only have 35 to this point because we have been having some heavy rainfalls, which we are very grateful for that in the respect of which I speak. When we have rainfalls, we hardly have bushfires because the soil and the bushes, the shrubs, they are wet most of the times. And persons would not light bushes most of the times when they are wet. They would light bushes and shrubs in the dry season. It seems as though persons in St. Vincent, they just like to light bushes in the dry season as opposed to persons in the Grenadines. You know, I often wonder if it's because they realize that they do not have access to water in the Grenadines as opposed to St. Vincent, where we have access to a lot of water. That is just my feeling. Or is it because the persons in the Grenadines sees it that it is very dangerous to the children, for example, who light some of these fires, it is very dangerous for them in the Grenadines. If they light a fire, it can spread to houses and so forth down there in the Grenadines. In St. Vincent, you would find most of our bushes are where houses are not immediately located. So there are some areas in St. Vincent where we would have had some spontaneous reaction. That is to say, you would have, when the soil heats up, you would have an opening of the soil. As we have volcanic, we have sulfuric rocks. And these areas would ignite. For example, what we call up on Humonchos or Monkey Hill, we have the Maquis Hill area. We have some parts in Lomans Bay and Otley Hall. These are areas where we would have to be responding on a regular basis during the dry season. So I would stay there for now.
But these areas, why these areas in particular, as opposed to other areas?
Jesus, Lord. These areas are the areas, they are very dry and high. Mm-hmm. These are the hills. And they have, these are the areas where we have sulfuric rocks.
Okay.
If I may.
Sure.
I also just want to support what the chief is saying, because in these specific areas, Vinlec has infrastructure, transmission and distribution lines, and there have been many times in which the poles have caught a fire. And we're talking about the main transition line, which is the 33 line going up Monkey Hill. We call it cross country. And when those catch a fire, essentially, the fire truck can't get there, our facility cannot get there, you literally have to let it burn out and then deal with the repercussions of getting repairs done. But it is a type of soil specifically in such areas that has that chemical reaction that caused the fire. And just to lead on in a simple way, a fire essentially occurs because of three components. You have oxygen, which is a significant factor. You have heat, and you have fuel. And fuel could be bush, it could be paper. You have different type of fires. But essentially, once those three elements combine, a chemical reaction takes place, and then you have ignition. And that fire is uncontrollable in many cases.
Okay, and how have the authorities been combating these occurrences?
Most of the times, if the truck cannot reach where these fires are located, we have a system in place where we would use beaters, and it all depends on the size of the fire.
You use what?
Beaters. We have some equipment that we would use to beat the fire out if it's not a big fire. Other than that, we would just have to wait until it burnt out itself.
Okay. So in general, what are the causes of fires in your experience? The main causes. I mean, you have the bushfires, of course, the house fires, commercial fires, commercial buildings.
Well, most of the house fires are because of negligence on the part of the homeowners. Some persons are overcharging their electrical equipment. Some persons would plug in a number of electrical equipment into one outlet with an adapter. And sometimes these adapters are overheated and create an ignition. And as my good friend said just now, if you have an ignition and you have, for example, you have wires in that outlet box, and these wires are insulated. So then right there you have fuel, which would burn and continue to burn outwards until it meets other fuel to create a bigger fire. Some persons would have left their pots on cooking and would fall asleep. Some persons would be smoking in their beds or a chair, and they would fall asleep. Some persons would consume alcohol and they would fall asleep because of alcohol, and they would try to cook. And they know that they are tired and they are intoxicated and they fall asleep. Lo and behold, you hear the house is on fire. Just recently we had a fire in the fountain area where a house was burnt, and it was reported that the owner of the house heard an explosion while they were asleep, and it would appear as if that explosion came from the refrigerator. Some of the fires would have caused through electrical fans, which are also over-energized and ignite, especially during the nighttime. Children as well would have contributed to some of these fires by, they want to experiment with matches and all that. And some of them would even light their bed mattresses and light the chairs, yes, because they would want to see, as a child, they would want to see the effect, what would happen if they do these things, Some children would have walked from as far as Lomans Hill and go to other areas and light vehicles. Young children, yes. So all these reports we would have had and had to deal with. So these are some of the main causes of house fires. Also, as I referred to building fires a short while ago, one lady would have pulled some coals and she would have bagged them, not realizing that all
embers
all weren't cool.
Wasn't cool.
And that reignited the entire sack and onto another sack, onto another one, and burned the shed down. So there are different instances where we would have all these different types of ignitions.
I'd like to just say something first and foremost to fellow Vincentians who have suffered in the case of fires. I personally and professionally want to just reach out to those persons. It's a terrible experience for anyone to have go through that and the effects of that. And I want to take all opportunities to just highlight to the listening public viewers that what we're attempting to share would be tools and guidelines that they can put in place to actually minimize or mitigate at the end of this show. I want to go back to something the chief referred to in the electrical space.
Okay, so I wanted to deal with that electrical component, but we'll take our first break, and when we come back during the next segment, we'll pick up on that point. Okay. Back in just a moment.
The children of the future, have them read, learn, grow. Only reading is the key, so have them read, learn, grow. Let's show them how much fun it is to read, learn, grow. So parents, you play your part. First and foremost, reading from so young is advantageous. Link with the teachers, working hand in hand is a must. Just 10 minutes of your child reading to you is a plus. Get fun books, make reading priority. When children read, they are able to learn, and the more they learn, the more they grow. So parents help the kids read, learn, grow. Reading is fun, kids have to know. Read, learn, grow. The children are the future, help them read, learn, grow. So parents, you play your part.
This message is brought to you by the OECS USAID Early Learners Program, funded by United States Agency for International Development. For more information, log on to www.oecs.org/ELP.
I am Dr. Gerald Thompson, an infectious disease specialist. I'm inviting you every week to join our program, Healthy Choices, Healthy Actions, a health program that you need to see.
Welcome back. Just before we took our very first break, Stanley, you were about to make a point in respect of the electrical natures of these fires. Go right ahead.
The chief alluded to the fact of several aspects electrically, and one of the first was in regard to persons using adapters. Now, there are several types of adapters on the market, and clearly persons would purchase based on either price or their interests. However, I want to give some direct guidelines in regard to adapters. If you're using an adapter, essentially, instead of having a multi-purpose adapter in which typically the engagement between the male and female, that is the pins for the plug and what takes into the adapter, would normally be shaken, and persons would not be cognizant. So I want to speak towards the more detailed aspects so persons can understand the implication. So unconsciously, I want to plug in my phone adapter. I may have television or some other device, and I plug several devices into this adapter, and it may be going to 110 device, etc. However, what persons must be mindful of is that once you feel in a shake, that is a sign you ought not to use such an adapter. When you plug in a particular adapter, it should be snugly fit. Because what tends to happen is that unconsciously we have various homes, we have various parties in the homes, and when one person plug in, they're not even realizing there's an electrical arc. They're not realizing that. They might just say pitch fire, but they will plug in other things.
What's an electrical arc?
Imagine when we strike a match, we see an arc.
Okay.
Electrically, when something is not done properly, you would see one, but it is caused electrically. So when you plug in something, two pieces of metal are actually going to be touching, and you will see a little spark. Okay? So when you have those adapters that are not snugly fit, people are going to plug in stuff, but they're not going to be quite mindful that they see in this arc and what its impact can be. So they will plug in other things, and then you will get an event which is called overheating. And as the chief said, once you begin to have heat, remember electricity is going to flow, the device is plugged in, you will have further events taking place. So a chain reaction will then occur. Okay? And what I want persons to be mindful of is before we get to the electrical or a non-electrical fire, but speaking in the terms of electrical, what you are likely to happen is that you will have a fault condition which can affect you, the individual. So before we get to property and fire, I'm saying that you can get shock. And a fatality by electricity is called electrocution, so you can die. And so while we may not have the end result being a fire that caused by electricity, you can have harm to yourself, or you can have harm to loved ones. And I just want to bring home that point in a significant way, okay? The chief spoke about fans, and clearly you have persons, it's warm. It's now cool these days, is it not? However, you are sleeping with a fan, and there are telltale signs I just want you to recognize. Now, when your fan is not spinning as it normally should be spinning free, and I'm speaking to us as just being a normal person, not in any capacity, engineer, etc., etc. Heck boy, I feel hot tonight. I'm gonna take my finger or take a pencil and I start spinning that blade. Oh my goodness, now it started to rotate. And then I got the cool breeze and I go and lie down. Now what you don't know is that there is an electrical phenomenon that is taking place because fans in normal condition ought not to be stuck. So while you are sleeping, this fan is trying to turn, it don't have the energy, so it's going to draw more current and it's going to heat up. And that heat up eventually cause a catastrophic failure, which results in a fire. So persons are not conscientious, they are attempting to get the outcome they're looking for, but not relating the consequences that such would occur. And I'm just feeding on to two that he indicated. There are many more, but I'll give my colleagues opportunity to share also.
So just to add what Stanley just said, also a lot of times, homeowners, you have faulty appliance. And sometimes those of you who have circuit breaker that trip, so you plug in something, the breaker trip, you plug it out, and then you go back and you turn on the circuit breaker, right? And sometimes your appliance might even shock you, and you take it for granted, right? So what we are urging persons out there, homeowners, occupants, you have a faulty appliance, get an expert to check it. Your breaker keep tripping. It is not just tripping because it just wants to trip. It is because a fault is existing in your installation, whether it's the appliance you are plugging in or the installation itself is faulty. So we are urging you to take the necessary precaution. Always use a licensed electrician and a professional to do whatever remedial work that is needed to be done in your homes.
So I had a personal experience a couple of nights ago where I turned the light switch on in my kitchen and immediately got a shock response. So what could have caused something like that, and how should I deal with that? Is the actual plug that you switch the switch
on?
Yeah.
Okay. Like all things, we get old. And all electrical appliance switches, after time they get worn, the cables become old, they get broken and such. So in that case, you should get an electrician to check the switch to see if the switch itself is faulty or the wires that come into it is faulty. So you need to get an electrician to check out.
But I just want to say in that regard also that it also depends on the condition in which you yourself actually was turning that on. Most persons may not be walking with a house slippers inside their homes. We are currently having tiles as opposed to the board flooring that some of us grew up with. And it may have been early in the morning where it might have been more moist or chilly. It might have been afternoon. It might be rainy time. What I want you to be mindful of in general, and while speaking of your case, but amplifying it, is that conditions, environmental conditions, has an impact in the conduction of electricity. And if fault exists, there can be intermittent conditions in which it's extremely dry, you are wearing a slippers indoor, nothing happens, but it would have been existing. However, it may also depend that it may not be the wiring installation, but a particular device that is faulty, it's feeding into the system. So there are multiplicities, and therefore that is why it's invariably important that a licensed person actually is called in to examine and explore. I would put a duty on our listeners and viewers that when you're seeking someone, make background checks to just identify where they've worked, make some checks, as opposed to some persons say that they know how to do this and you engage them. Because invariably so many persons are out there doing things and maybe they said they haven't found anything and things are existing. And I bring that to bear in a very calm way, because where I sit and where we have been, we have seen many of things, and I professionally just want to encourage persons to do background, because we will have disputes professionally between VINLEC and you or the inspectorate, because we're coming from a particular background and many persons will say that they got this person to do that or do the next. And at times I would say, whoever you engage, that's up to you, okay?
Okay, but make sure you get a professional.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the protocols when one is embarking on actual wiring of their home or building. What are the requirements?
Okay, so the requirements when you are going to do an electrical installation, you must engage a licensed electrician. There is an application form. The first thing is a notification form that states that you are about to do work at Miss Teresa Daniel's property. So they would bring that to the electrical inspectorate. In most cases, a lot of persons, when they are doing a new installation, they would apply for what we call a temporary connection. Temporary, in that case, we give you 3 months, where you would set up a temporary connection, whether on your whether you would set it up
just to jump in, just to collab.
Right?
Essentially, after the process is taking place with the Government Electrical Inspectorate, a request will be made also to VINLEC, in which you would provide your ID, proof of ownership of property or permission thereof, etc. And we would process a connection. That temporary connection may be for construction purposes, in which a facility will be in place to take it temporarily, because there would not be any immediate structure there. It may be a shed that persons would store things on. And invariably, so what we would want to encourage the public is that they may have somebody, to put it to you, colloquially, knock up something because they see it as not that significant. But what you do have is that rain and weather is going to hit that particular temporary preparation. So it should be enclosed to effect limitation of water getting into the facility. And I must say publicly here that if we get a particular installation that somebody came for a connection, and what would happen internally is team members would reach out to various parties and take pictures and say, hey, this is what we saw. We would deny the connection, and automatically it would trigger communication from us to the electrical inspectorate to say, please, can you go back and see that this person here has put something there that can come to be a harm to them. And so we will not seek to effect a connection where we see potential danger to the holder of that service.
Right. So normally what you would do, you would apply to us for an electrical inspection, whether you put it on your shed or you put it on a pole. But there are requirements. It needs to be enclosed away from all elements of the weather. You know, RCD protection is necessary and all temporary at this time. So when your application is processed, we give you a voucher, you pay at the treasury, After you finish paying at the treasury, then our electrical inspectors would come to the premises and we would have it inspected. If when we inspect everything is in according to standard, then we process you a certificate which you will take to VINLEC, and VINLEC would then do the necessary connection.
Okay, we'll take our second break and come back.
children are the future, help them read, learn, grow. Early reading is the key, so help them read, learn, grow. Let's show them how much fun it is to read, learn, grow. So parents, you play your part.
First and foremost, reading from so young is advantageous. Link with the teachers, working hand in hand is a must. Just 10 minutes of your child reading to you is a plus. Get fun books, make reading priority. When children read, they are able to learn, and the more they learn, the more they grow. So parents help the kids read, learn, grow. Reading is fun, kids have to know.
Read, learn, grow. The children are the future, help them read, learn, grow. So parents, you play your part.
This message is brought to you by the OECS USAID Early Learners Program, funded by United States Agency for International Development. For more information, log on to www.oecs.org/ELP.
Welcome back. Just before we took our last break, we were talking about the importance of following the steps to properly install your electricity in the right way. I want to talk a little bit about the collaboration between all three agencies represented this evening. How do you guys work together, collaborate in the event of a fire? Because I suspect that you all have different roles. So how do you collaborate?
Watch the camera.
When there is a house fire reported and we respond, police control would also at the same time communicate with the relevant authorities from VINLEC, and they would respond to remove or disconnect the electricity from that building or that structure. So that is how it works. Anytime a fire is reported and it's a house fire, police control communicates with VINLEC and they respond, just like how we would respond to remove the electricity from the building.
I just want to say that while in law, my understanding is that the police is the only entity that has the designation of emergency vehicle. And I want to just say a plug there, so for a moment before indicating VINLEC and the other entities, is that whenever there is a fire, I've often heard the chief in various forums publicly indicating to drivers and motorists to make clear when the fire truck is on the road, because response time is a significant factor. And I say that because not only a fire, but a VINLEC. So we are not deemed emergency. However, imagine that the fire department engaged VINLEC emergency to get at the location so that the service could be disconnected and isolated. Remember, time is a factor, because the firemen are working with elements that are potentially conductive elements, so the service needs to be turned off. And those emergency team need to get to that location as quick as possible so that they can reasonably respond in a time so that the fire department could then do the work that they need to do. And so while the fire department personnel might be getting on site, VINLEC also will be mobilized. But in law, the fire department will have the precedent that you pull aside, just like an ambulance or other officials publicly that have the capability for outriders to move. And I can only encourage our citizens who are driving, please adhere to this, because when it is you, you will want it. And I just ask, be sympathetic and considerate. They are moving towards responding to someone in our nation. Okay? So when our team is moving, clearly they are going to move at a pace also to try and get there naturally to turn off than fire truck men waiting ready to outfire. Yes? And so that is one aspect. The other aspect clearly is that in the process, if there is deemed something electrical, after our colleague at Inspectorate is engaged, we may be alerted to it, and in the end part there is follow through, because naturally it may be a fire that doesn't consume the entire structure and persons would need to do remedial action. So clearly those persons will be informed what are the requirements they need to comply with. They would make, that is, the customer may make interaction with us. We will naturally reach out to Inspectorate, what has been the requirement, had the person followed through, etc., etc. And once that is cleared and the documentation has been completed, they will bring it to us and we proceed for reconnection. But we're going on the premise, which is, I want to be clear, by regulation, by law, the authority in St. Vincent and the Grenadines for electrical installation certification lies with the Government Electrical Inspectorate. It doesn't lie with VINLEC. And I want to make clear also that the only trade that is in St. Vincent and the Grenadines that has by law to acquire a license is an wireman. Now, you know, doctors get licensed in North America. Engineers get licensed in North America. Lawyers get licensed in North America and the rest of the world, but in St. Vincent, the crafters saw it fit that electrical work was so significant that to practice you must have a license. So I want to make it clear, because sometimes we're not connecting the dots, that while I indicated and my colleague indicate a professional, I want to indicate that persons come and they say they have this. Being trained by the institute, etc., is one thing, but being licensed is a different thing. Okay? So I want to make that clear, because we do, all three of us, we face the world that is out there. Let me be clear with you. Okay?
Just a reminder that to contribute to the program, you can send your questions via our Facebook or YouTube pages, your questions or comments. Yesterday was 150 years since the establishment of the local fire brigade, as you call it. What has happened, what has transpired in those 150 years? Give us a little history, a little background, and to present day fire service.
Okay. The fire brigade started in 1872 on the 8th of November 1872. 1872 to 2022 is exactly 150 years since the fire brigade has been in existence. Now, when the fire brigade started in 1872, it started with 6 persons, 3 per team. And
for the whole country.
For the whole country then. And it came about because of the great Chicago fire, the great Boston fire, and the great Jamaican fires. So the heads of the Caribbean countries saw it fit to provide some form of protection for these countries as it relates to fires. So Jamaica, they would have started their fire brigade before us, and since then we started with 6 persons, and these 6 persons used to alternate their duties. They would come to work 10 a.m. this morning, and they would work for 24 hours. They would go home tomorrow at 10 a.m., and the other team will take over from that team which would have worked for the 24 hours. So it was just like you're home every day. And one time when I sat down, I was a consul, and I was working at Arnisville Fire Station. And I said to myself, you know, persons have to travel from Fancy to Arnisville and Duty and Kingston. Persons who are traveling from Pittibodel, Rosebank, and these places, Chateaubelair. So I said, it's very, very costly. At the time, I was traveling from Georgetown. So I know what it was like to travel every day. And when you come into work, you have to bring food, whether be it food that you can eat now or food that you would have to prepare. So that was very costly. So I said, I'm going to make a draft so that we can work for 2 clear days and go home for 2 days instead of working 1 and go home for 1. And on the weekend, we go home on the Saturday morning at 10 a.m. and we return on Tuesday morning. So on the weekend, you would have 3 clear days for yourselves to do whatever you wish. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday you return to work and work. Tuesday, Wednesday, and you go home Thursday at 10. You come back on Thursday at 10 and go back home on Saturday. So after I made that proposal, I wrote it on an envelope at home, and I took it to my inspector at the time at Arnisville, was Inspector Bilingi. And a proper document was formulated. Mr. Harry was the commissioner at the time, and he said, let us give it a try. And from then, that could have been about 12 years or so ago. And we are still on the trial to this day. And the men are more relaxed, they are more comfortable, they are more at ease, because especially in the dry seasons where we would have a lot of fires being reported, which they have to respond to all of them, they would be very tired. And sometimes, they would be very, very burnt out. And to go home for 2 days, you have 2 days to rest, to recuperate, and come again to work. So I really like the idea. I put it forward, and it was honored, and we are still using that up to this day.
You're still using the same firefighting methods from 150 years
No.
ago?
Remember those days, as I indicated earlier, were the days of the buckets, the bucket brigade, where they were using the galvanized buckets, if you remember, because I know you were wrong. I know you were wrong in the 60s and in the 70s and so forth. So they were using those methods in the earlier parts because they didn't have hoses like how we have hoses and branch pipes and we have hydrants, fire hydrants, and all these things. They didn't have those things. So what they used to be doing, they used to use sand. So you used to see a whole heap of buckets line up to extinguish fires, bucket of sand, because water was not easily come by. So that was the method That's why they call it then the bucket brigade.
We still seem to have a problem with water these days, but we'll talk about that when we come back for our final segment, and we'll talk about some of the things that we can do to manage or prevent or minimize the incidence of fire here in St. Vincent. Back in just a moment.
I am Dr. Gerald Thompson, an infectious disease specialist. I'm inviting you every week to join our program, Healthy Choices, Healthy Actions, a health program that you need to see.
Welcome back. What are some of the things that can be done? What steps can we take to improve the services of the fire department or brigade? What are some of the things you'd like to see implemented?
I would like to see that we can have a team of trained auxiliary firefighters in our communities. And these persons can be trained by the fire department. I would also like to see the installation of more fire hydrants in the communities. I know Central Water and Sewage Authority has been working hand in hand with the fire department over the last couple of years, and they have installed a number of hydrants in the Windward, especially the Windward district, as far as Fancy. But apart from having these trained auxiliary firefighters, I would like to see fire cabinets in the same location where these hydrants are erected. Because we have a fire truck, a fire appliance at Georgetown Police Station to service from Fancy to Bayabo. But it would take time to get to these locations if there is a fire in Bayabo, or there is a fire in Fancy or Sandy Bay or what have you. So if we have trained persons there and we have hydrant cabinets with hoses and branch pipes at the locations, these trained auxiliary firefighters can respond
immediately.
So like community volunteers?
Yes, they can respond to a fire until the fire appliance gets there. These are some of the things that I would like to see before I depart from this noble fire department and Royal St. Vincent and Grenadines Police Force. I would also like to see fire stations being built in some of the out districts, especially if we could have had a fire station in the more built-up commercial areas in Arnesville, Caliacor, that area, which is the main hub of tourism, where you have a number of business houses and very expensive homes. So I would like to see a fire station being built in that area. I would like to see a fire station is built in Barley, one in Georgetown. We have 2 trucks which were bought for Georgetown and Barley, but there's one at Georgetown, but there isn't a location to house a staff where that can take effect to have another fire truck or fire appliance in Barley, for example, to service the leeward side of the island.
The station at Annisville is still operational?
No, that station was closed when the airport was closed as well.
Transferred in.
So it was transferred to Argyle Fire Station.
You know, there's always, I don't know if it's true or not, but people always seem to be complaining about the fact that the fire trucks always run out of water when they come on location. Does this have to do with the capacity or of the trucks, or what is it?
I can answer that question in two folds, but I'll choose to answer it this way. A fire appliance has a certain capacity. If you have a capacity of 1,000 gallons of water, for example, and there is a fire and it's a big fire. For example, if it's a house fire, it all depends on where the fire is located in that house, especially if a fire is in a ceiling, that it would be very, very difficult to put out, as opposed to a fire just there on the floor of a building and is rising towards the ceiling. That would be an easy knockdown. If and when that water runs out, that 1,000 gallons of water, if it's not in an area where we can do a relay, let's say there's a hydrant in the area, we can do a relay from the hydrant to the fire truck and to the response area. If that is not,
you have to refill.
If that is not present, we must retreat to replenish. And I would hear persons would make sarcastic remarks as it relates to us going there without water as well. You understand? And which is not true, far from the truth. So these are some of the challenges we have, because you cannot put you don't know where a fire is going to start, and you can't put a fire hydrant all over St. Vincent.
You're correct, and I'm glad you were able to give some clarity on that. Someone is saying, yes, I totally agree that time is a key factor. Even neighbors do not seem to take things seriously in responding to a fire. I was shocked earlier this year when I was watching a fire at home in Kingstown, and people were taking pictures with their cell phones, and it took about half an hour before the emergency team arrived. I think people need more education on how serious a fire can become and how to respond.
Okay. What I will also, pertaining to the house fire that are electrically, I am asking persons that your certificate, when we do your inspection for domestic, which is residential, your certificate is valid for 10 years. After 10 years, I'm advising that you come in and have your property re-inspected. For commercial, it's 5 years, and industrial is 3 years. After those years have expired, you no longer have a valid electrical certificate. So we are asking that you come in and have your property re-inspected. Remember, electrical safety is everybody's business.
Very important.
I want to take it up from both colleagues, indicating supporting both entities. However, I'd like to just dig a little deeper, both for the homeowners and the business persons. So let me start with the homeowners. Essentially, I would suggest in a basic way a 3-point plan. One, identify in your household conditions which you may not be cognizant of, but use your senses to establish if you have anomalies. Sense. You might smell something and you may pay less attention. You might hear something, you might pay less attention. You might feel something, you might pay less attention. So pay attention to those things which your senses can speak towards. Secondly, I will strongly recommend electrically be mindful. If you know you have been on this property for a period of time, I strongly recommend, advise that you go in and have your property re-inspected. And while you're re-inspecting, just be mindful that while we do occasional maintenance on our property, also be cognizant if you have conditions which may be structural conditions. For argument's sake, as simple as this, water is getting in somewhere where they are passing on things electrically. Okay, so I say pay attention not only to the wiring installation and the equipment or appliances, which is two distinct aspects, but also pay attention to structural things, because people naturally want electricity, but conditions may not be adequate way that structure should be having electricity. So be mindful of structural things so that you can get attention to that. And thirdly, I would strongly advocate that discuss with your family a basic plan. Hey, did you turn off the gas? We're leaving home. Hey, anybody notice that something might have been cooking? You show the fire off. That's one, right? But at the same time, be mindful that if you're leaving and you have certain things that may have been plugged in, it's not going to hurt you if you lose Wi-Fi while you're away. Understand me? It's not going to hurt you. You may have been ironing, slip out there so to go check on something, and juice boy, you forgot the iron on. So all I'm saying is that work out, discuss with your family a basic idea of a checklist, what we're going to do, and this is how we do business in our house. So at my house, for example, the folks would say, I am late. So they're outside waiting in the vehicle. But I'm going to tell you something. I go into every room. I ensure for safety and security they are locked. I ensure that the gas is off, because I want to tell a simple story. A low house, cost house might be 85,000. A medium-sized house might be 185,000. And a high-class house might be 285,000. Now think for a moment what you put into that house. Geez, I go to the bank, I get the money, I put it in, I furnish it, etc., etc. And we're not thinking that we're going to pay 25, 35 years for this thing, for the middle and the higher one. Mm-hmm. Maybe the 85 one got self-help, etc. But what happens is that when a fire occurs, you are literally at a place where you're at below zero. Mm-hmm. Right. When I say below zero, remember you're going to lose your worldly possessions, etc. Nobody is going to come and say, come stay with me for 6 months. Mm. You're with me. And the bank is still looking for their money.
Absolutely.
When you take out from courts, they're looking for the bed, still money, etc. So all I'm saying, pay attention, because in the beginning, this significant cost you outlay, you can do simple things to mitigate and minimize the potential. Now, in the case of homes, that's one. But let's just take a small look in business. Clearly, in Kingston, within the last 3 to 5 years, there have been at minimum 3 major issues that I am acquainted with. And it could have been catastrophic, this event. Mm-hmm. So buildings, owners, operators put in fire protection devices, detectors of smoke, fire, alarm, put in sprinkler system, because the greater your asset is, the greater you need to protect that asset. And I'm saying it's only by way that we caught some things in the, let me call it, in the move, because some major entities in Kingston would have been, I tell you, flat on the ground.
That's true.
Wow. Okay, so someone is saying, commendation to the fire chief. The idea of volunteer fire personnel in communities is an urgent need. And somebody else is agreeing, saying it's a great suggestion. It may be easier achievable if the fire services is removed from the police services and given a life of its own.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, well, I think that is a perfect note on which to end this evening's edition of Roundtable Talk. It was such a pleasure to have all 3 of you here sharing with us some of the things that we can do to minimize the occurrence of fires in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Come back anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fire Chief. Thank you very much. The lady in charge of the electrical installations, in the Inspectorate Division, and of course, Mr. Stanley Harris from VINLEC, who gives us all of the power. Okay, thank you. See you again next week, Wednesday, same time, for another edition of Roundtable Talk. Have a pleasant Wednesday evening. Goodbye.